I've put out 33 essays with famous people, like prominent artists, musicians, writers, and Bainbridge Currents, the Arts and Humanities online community, has sent them out every week for 33 weeks, and it'll be a book. It actually is done, but I haven't figured out exactly how I want who or what to have publish it. But so it was perfect timing that Reed asked me to be with you today. So I will just say next slide. So basically what I'm going to do is I've pulled out quotes that were really meaningful for me in this time since February that we've spent isolated, and talk a little bit about them. The first one, for those of you, well, let me ask Reed, are there some people that have called in but aren't on video?
It looks like everybody who is here is on video, so they should be able to see the slides.
Okay. Well, the quotes are short. Helen Keller said, "We could never learn to be brave and patient if there were only joy in the world." Having spent many months now at home and taking walks, I was filled with appreciation that I'm able to enjoy being with my wife. We're retired. We've been together 51 and a half years. And fortunately, the internet hasn't broken. What is the most difficult is knowing that so many people around the world are suffering. That kind of breaks my heart, of course, all of us. But I'm encouraged by the countless stories of bravery, when I can dig them out of the news, as neighbors reach out to neighbors and thousands risk their lives on the front lines to help the sick and elderly. So I'm hopeful that this difficult situation, like in the past years, will continue to bring the world closer with a shared sense of respect and responsibility. And if there was a theme of my talk today, I guess it would be how to find hope in the middle of the swamp. You know, there's a Buddhist and other religions parable of the lotus flower that blooms in a muddy swamp, which is kind of like our lives right now are a muddy swamp, if we choose to look at it that way. Or we can choose to, okay, how can I turn at least my life and my immediate circumstance, my immediate environment into a lotus flower, something beautiful with joy and happiness. Keller also said, "I long to accomplish a great noble task, but it is my chief duty to accomplish small tasks as if they were great and noble." So as a young person, I felt a compelling desire to accomplish something grand, such as cure the common cold, start an international nonprofit, or travel to outer space. That was a big one, which I haven't given up on. I eventually learned that even the smallest positive action I took was extremely meaningful. Whether that was raising two wonderful daughters, befriending the checker behind the plexiglass screen at TNC, or encouraging a friend over FaceTime, I know that greatness is comprised of many small steps. And when I took that pressure off myself, that I had to accomplish great things, which is what we get from the media and what unfortunately our young people see, is all the people that are put on pedestals, right, have accomplished something quote unquote great. So you somehow feel less than. And I think the more we can get away from that, the healthier we are. The last quote from Helen Keller I wanted to share is, "Security is mostly a superstition. It does not exist in nature." So perhaps what is most frightening about this pandemic is we can't hear it, see it, or fathom the extent of this insidious threat. Many times Keller had to trust other people like Anne Sullivan to watch out for her. So similarly, my physical well-being at this time is dependent on the thoughtful behavior of my fellow citizens, all of you. It really puts into perspective why Keller was so frightened as a child, but also how I was so amazed when I did research on her for this particular article, that she was a movie and traveling show actress. She actually did a traveling show for 2 years with Anne Sullivan. If you go to YouTube, it's really fascinating to watch a video of her. What an amazing woman, such a great example. Next slide, please. a little bit about being alone during this time. And some of us, I'm very fortunate that I get along very well with my bride, and which is, considering we've been together since we were 18 and 17, is now we're 70 and 69, is pretty remarkable. And so I feel very fortunate in that sense. And I know that maybe some of you are by yourself. And that I can only imagine that must be much, much more difficult. It's like my Seattle daughter. And so, this does describe, though, much of my life this year. The people I have taken for granted that we can only see out back sometimes around the fire pit. So taking pressure off myself has created space to be more creative, and otherwise could have resulted in a lot of pressure and anxiety. Lately, I've been reflecting what it means to be 70 and moving closer to the end of this life. As an abused child and confused teenager who suffered from severe depression, I was too afraid of the present to expend much energy worrying about the future, much less old age. Most of the old people I knew back then seemed full of regret and suffering. And it wasn't until I started practicing Buddhism together with my wife, Trudy, in 1969, that I got a glimpse of a different way to age, one full of hope and vitality instead of fear and sadness. There is this saying that goes, "To a fool, old age is a bitter winter. To a wise person, it is a golden time." So without my spiritual practice and the support of a loving family and friends, my winter would be bitter indeed this year. So I'm so grateful this doesn't have to be the case. And I do look forward to laughing well into my 90s. And I'm hopeful that in some small way I can contribute to you also laughing well into your 90s and 100s. Do what you can with what you have where you are. That's Theodore Roosevelt said that. I find this such a more positive way to live my life instead of always wishing I was someone else or something else. I always felt like there was a got it club and I just didn't get it. You know, they didn't invite me to belong. No two relationships will ever be the same, nor should they be. So what I realize that what works for some might not work for others. And I've realized that in difficult times like these, certain fundamental behaviors are critical, such as respecting my wife Trudy's boundaries, which is something that we both have this wonderful therapist, Kathleen, that we talk to on Fridays, which has really helped this year. And Kat and I, and Trudy and I've learned so much. Even after all these years, I still have so much to learn about her boundaries and other people's boundaries and respecting them and questioning my own and making my own boundaries clear to her and other people, and questioning my thoughts before expressing them is a big one, especially while being trapped at homes for months on end. So, is what I'm about to say kind? Is it necessary? Just this simple exercise has really contributed to our ongoing harmony. This also required me to continually work on mastering my mind instead of allowing my mind to master me. Next slide, please. I think. Oh, no, you can go back a slide. I'm sorry. This quote's from Daisaku Ikeda, a Buddhist philosopher and my mentor in life. "It would be great if we could live cheerfully, enjoying life to the extent that we regard our partner's nagging as a sign of their good health and proof that they are still alive and kicking. When we develop a broad state of life, then even our partner's ranting and raving will sound like the sweet song of a bird." So actually, if I'm quiet for a second, I can hear Trudy chirping in the background. It's like music to my ears. Next slide, please. One of my favorite people, and maybe many of you in this lifetime, is Lily Tomlin. She has said so many things that have stuck with me, and that for many years, 17 years until I retired, I had my own management consulting business as an executive coach, and used her quotes quite often. And this one I used I must have done over 100 strategic planning sessions, and I always use this quote. "I always wanted to be somebody, but now I realize I should have been more specific." And so many of my clients, and I find in general, many of the young people I talk to, and when I talk every year to all the high school freshmen, and they have vague personal organizational goals. My clients, Young people, some of them know what they want to be, are very fixated, but many of them have no idea, which at that age is age appropriate. And I think during this difficult pandemic and social political chaos that we've all suffered through, it's even more important to have specific short and long-term goals. These, even if these are small and perhaps to others seemingly insignificant, I think having those goals can prevent at least someone like me from sinking into perhaps a depression, because I have too much time to just think. And what I found is my mind is more often than not saying things to me that are particularly useful. They're usually old habits and tapes that are just want to play over again. Next quote, she said, "I wondered why somebody doesn't do something about the problems in the world. Then I realized I was somebody." So this sounds to me like Gandhi, you know, who be the change, who entreated us to become the change we would like to see in the world, which is very relevant today when it's so easy to fall into the blame game, which, I mean, if you just, I mean, obviously, you know, look on social media and everyone's blaming everyone else. And some of the most wonderful guidance or advice Trudy and I got when we were very young, and we would go take turns on Sunday to go to this older couple that we really respected. And this man, Guy McCloskey, they live in Chicago now, but Guy had said we would complain about each other. I mean, you know, we were 18 and 17, 19, 20, getting along. I mean, we didn't even know how to get along with ourselves, much each other. And his advice to us was, rather than, as long as you face each other and are looking at the other person as the source of your problem, you'll never be happy. But he said, as long as one of you, if one of you can face forward, in this case, we chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo to a scroll that's like a mirror of our inside, but whatever your spiritual practice, if it's God, whatever it is, meditating, that as long as one of you faces forward and takes responsibility for your part in the relationship, the other person will straighten up or they'll go off. And that has been so true all through our marriage, and I found it to be true in every relationship I have. That is, as soon as I can get myself to own my part, that I can only change myself. I can't change all the people that don't agree with me, but I can change myself. I can become more compassionate toward them. I can become a better dialoguer. I can become a better listener, even if I don't agree with them. Last quote on this is, "Humans invented language to satisfy their deep need to complain." So I guess we have that to fall on. Although as a writer, I promise to always try to avoid being negative and instead use words that nurture hope in my mind and spread that hope to the world instead of inflammatory words. Next slide, please. So there's an exhibit that's been going around for at least 15 years, and it's called the Gandhi King Ikeda. And it was started actually by, let me find, I always forget his name, although Lawrence Carter, who's an American historian professor. And he started this exhibit and has recently wrote a book about it. And speaking of misfortune, there is no way I can fully grasp the depth of frustration being experienced by people of color, right? All of us, these horrific murders of African Americans. So I've been asking myself the last few months in particular, what can I do as a 70-year-old, bald-headed, white Jewish Buddhist to make a difference in this kind of seemingly hopeless situation that's been going on forever, it seems? Well, during this forced stay at home, I've continued to dig even deeper to root out my own prejudices and in my own small way be a voice for peace and tolerance in the spirit of Gandhi, King, and Ikeda. These three men from three different cultures and continents followed a common path of profound dedication and achievement in improving the lives of countless people. For several years, this international exhibit has gone around, and it talks about the pivotal principles of these three spiritual leaders. Gandhi said, "In a moment of our trial and our triumph, let me declare my faith. I believe in loving my enemies." I mean, that has been the underlying message of every single world religion I know of. And yet when I look at most world religions today, they really struggle to embrace everyone else who doesn't believe the way they do. And I think that change has to start with the individual. I mean, a law is never going to make that happen, as we've seen. And Gandhi led a successful, decades-long nonviolent struggle against British rule in India. Worldwide example of courageous civil disobedience as a means to accomplish change. And this is so in contrast to passivity, which is merely doing nothing. And I have to be honest, as a privileged, person that, living in a beautiful home, here off of Ferncliff and Bainbridge Island near the ferry, and, Trudy and I can put my head in the sand, and I have to really dig deep to not do that, in my own small way. It doesn't have to be huge. I don't have to change the whole world, but each person I come in contact with, how can I make a difference in this one connection, even if it's in the grocery store or in a Zoom meeting or today? Martin Luther King said, "Darkness cannot drive away darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Having had an embarrassingly, among other things, racist father, I was drawn in 1969 to the SGI. So it's an ethnically diverse worldwide lay Buddhist organization. And he's the third SGI president. And it's the lay organization. It's been around for 750 years, but the lay organization really took off after World War II in Japan. And now he's introduced it to 192 countries, and there's about 12 million of us. And he said, a great human revolution in just a single individual will help achieve a change in the destiny of a nation, and further will enable a change in the destiny of humankind. We really have to have confidence that each one of us might be that butterfly. When I talk to the freshmen every year, one of those freshmen, if I can give them a spark of hope when otherwise maybe they were going to take their own life, which happens every year, and if instead maybe they go on to be the valedictorian and go on to become the president of the United States. And, I don't know, none of us know what a hello or a how are you to someone who might be suffering, and maybe they're at the edge, right, ready to go off the cliff. And just because we called and said, "Hey, I'm just checking in to see how you're doing," and they go, "Okay, I'll try another day." We don't know. Lawrence Carter, an American that I told you about, the civil rights expert, he summed up his hope for the human race in this way: we humans cannot experience peace unless we are free of addiction, free of anger or grudge, free of anxiety, hopelessness, fear, or depression, free of victimhood, free from being unforgiving, free from wanting to exact revenge, free from self-deception, free from denial, projection, and avoidance. Freedom means being free from self-imposed negative beliefs, from old stories that limit and confine us. When we are free from these things, all of life has the opportunity to manifest as love. I mean, I probably could have saved you all a lot of time just by reading that quote and saying bye. But I do love that quote. I just came across it recently from the book he just had put out. And it really speaks volumes to me. And when I look at the leaders we have in the world today, so many of them fit none of those categories. They're so lost. And I know that we need to raise this next generation of leaders. So we really need to give hope to the youth so that they can become these kind of leaders. Next slide, please. So my last slide, or last one of these things, I think. So Byron Katie, actually the last article I wrote last week, and then or week before, and then I decided, okay, I'm going to give myself permission to stop now, was Byron Katie. And, she had this epiphany. You read about Byron Katie's life, and she, quite a few years ago, was on her second husband, was dependent on all sorts of drugs, was suicidal, and something else. She was just a mess. And so she went into a rehab place, and she had this epiphany that she didn't have to listen to her thoughts. which is pretty simple when you think about it, but it was so mind-blowing to her that she turned it into almost a world religion. I mean, she has many converts. I have a little bit of a problem sometimes with Byron Katie. She comes on a little strong. I think she's amazing. I've learned a lot from listening to some of her lectures. She did say that ever since that moment, she has experienced joy in every moment of her life. I have a little hard time swallowing that, because as human beings, we have many conditions of life. And I think we have to experience those, including sufferings, to have compassion for other people. And because we're human beings, and I don't see how you can have joy every minute. But she has 4 questions that our therapist Kat told Trudy and I about earlier this year. And they're awesome. Whenever we get stuck, we ask ourselves these 4 questions. So I wanted to share them with you. And this is centered around my thought is there isn't much hope for our country. I was feeling that way about the night of the election. I don't know about the rest of you. Whatever your political persuasion, we're all human beings, right? We're not enemies. We're people that have very different views on the world, maybe, but we're still human beings. And that should be the most common identity, because I believe in the interdependency of every human. I don't think we can live in isolation. Everything we do affects everyone in the world. But anyway, I digress. So I was feeling really sad and depressed that there isn't any hope for our country. And Kat, we happened to talk to Kat the next morning because she couldn't do Friday. And she reminded us, hey, let's do Byron Katie's 4 questions, which I turned into an article. The first one, is it true? Well, yes, our country is fractured. A lot of the world is fractured. There will be violent protests. There won't be a smooth transition of power. People of opposite views will never listen to each other. We still won't be able to see our grandkids. It's been since February because they live in Boston. And we won't be safe ever again. I mean, that's how I was feeling. And the next question is, can you absolutely know it's true? Well, no. There have been many other personal, political, social crises in my lifetime that we've individually and as a nation survived. Trudy has, as many of you know, has had multiple sclerosis from 1996, went numb from the waist down and couldn't walk. And she's an amazing human being. And we were able to turn that muddy swamp into some amazing personal growth that it caused me to really start dealing with the childhood abuse that I didn't even remember most that had happened. It caused me to change deal with my depression in amazing ways because she got MS. But at that time when she had MS, I thought there was no hope. But there was. Many of you will remember, like I do, the Vietnam War or the nuclear missiles in Cuba. So I can't know that it's absolutely true. And then the next question is, how do you react when you believe these thoughts? Well, I feel scared, heavy, and completely bereft of all hope. And lastly, and this is the key question, who would I be without these thoughts? Because like Katie Byron, you don't have to believe your thoughts. And the thoughts I were having were based on childhood fear that will come out in moments when I'm feeling the least hope. And, you know, a quick aside, I did just as a commercial for EMDR. If any of you are familiar with the EMDR, it started with using it for eye motion for Vietnam vets with their PTSD. And fortunately, 4 years ago, Jillian Worth, who's our doctor, said, Mike, you know, you've struggled with depression and bipolar and all the stuff that I've struggled with successfully in my life, but it's been so difficult. She said, I really think you have childhood PTSD, and if you do this kind of treatment, it might really help you. And I did it for 3 years, and I can honestly say that it's behind me. But I had to do the work. And I think it's the same thing today. We have to do the work. There's so much uncertainty that each one of us has our own fears from the past that this uncertainty brings out. But if we do the work and really, in whatever way is appropriate for you, whatever way that you center yourself, because if I didn't have these thoughts, I'd live more in the moment. I'd accept life's uncertainties. I'd recognize my resiliency, and I'd have confidence in my ability to help others. And I wouldn't believe all my thoughts or try to fix everything that pops into my mind, especially try to fix my wife, which is like, you know, guys, it's like the stupidest thing to try to do. That's boundaries, right? When I gave up on trying to change her, it freed her up to really live her life and have her experiences instead of me feeling I had to protect her all the time. Which when you have, as you know, some of you, when you live with someone who has a chronic illness, you can tend to be overprotective, but it's really not the right way to be. So I also remember that for good to triumph, evil has to be brought into the light, its true aspect revealed. That's a very fundamental Buddhist concept, that when the true aspect of our life or the world or our country or our organization or the senior center or the city, when that true aspect is revealed, we can see where the problems are and we can deal with them. Our country in my opinion, the last several years have seen this. We've lifted the carpet. And it's the same thing. The carpet's been lifted in our lives. Being isolated like we have been forces us to really live with ourselves. We can't just make excuse by being busy all the time. So we don't really ever stop to look in the mirror. I think this is happening everywhere in the world. And I'm confident that it'll be followed by a very long overdue positive global shift in how we humans treat each other. So an integral part of my spiritual practice is centered on returning to this being in the present mindset time and again. I mean, we keep coming back to that, right? All of us keep coming back, and we get lost and we bring ourselves back. That's our practice in this lifetime as human beings. Because like Daisaku Ikeda said, death inevitably comes to each of us. And we don't know when it's going to be, but whether it is a time of inner dignity and honor or a pitiful demise is completely reliant on how we live our lives right now, today. And in that sense, the moment of death truly exists in the present. I mean, the natural response to COVID-19 virus seems to be rather polarized. People are either excessively concerned about getting ill and possibly dying, or they're in denial, as if they somehow can get away with experiencing birth, old age, sickness, but not death. A healthier reaction, of course, is to accept the impermanence and fragility of life and take reasonable precautions for oneself and others, and then live each day with as much kindness and creativity as possible, which is, I think, a thought virus worth getting. It really helps me, in closing, to acknowledge that throughout history, there's always been greedy, narcissistic, hypocritical leaders. And being swayed by every outlandish, immoral, frightening tweet and thread I read or hear is highly unproductive. Andrew Bernstein, whoever he was, I have no idea, said that remember that stress doesn't come from what's going on in your life. It comes from your thoughts about what's going on in your life. So I'm also reminded yet again that we humans have a tendency to blame our circumstances and people beyond our control. And while on one level this might be valid, the Buddhist principle of the oneness of life and its environment explains that the root causes of our individual sorrow and joy originate from within us. This is what's projected onto the screen of our life. Collectively, the quality of our social and political environment is a reflection of people's inner life condition, as well as their ability or inability to get along. So therefore, change people, change society. So here's a closing with a shameless plug. My latest book that just came out last week is my 50 years of Buddhist practice. And it talks about how I've dealt with serious depression, my wife's multiple sclerosis, and etc. through our Buddhist practice and therapy. And it's available on Amazon at a very low price. I get thousands of people on Facebook groups, 140 Facebook groups. I gave it to them free as a PDF. So if you would like a free PDF, there's my email address. Just write it down and I'll email you a PDF of the book. Or you can buy Kindle for 99 cents. And the lowest they'd let me make the paperback, I think, was $7.95. So I made it $7.95 because I'm not trying to make money. I just want to share. Well, that's it, folks. Thank you so much for letting me share with you today.